I'm Brian Tuscan, your host. Welcome to Cop to Corporate. Today's guest is Scott Lake, and Scott's a former law enforcement officer. He spent many years in the police doing all kinds of stuff in the beautiful state of Illinois. Before he decided to leave mid-career, he had a lot of years in, but he just decided he wanted to jump into the private sector. He's been in the private sector for over 5 years, working for one of the largest insurance companies, and he's going to tell his story. So Scott Lake, tell us a little about you, your police career, and what was the catalyst or tipping point that made you want to go into the corporate sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Brian, thanks for having me on the show. I can't tell you how many times I've referred back to Cop to Corporate in the last 5 years since I've been out of law enforcement. And even I mentioned this to you when we were speaking before. The Cop to Corporate blog, the website that you had at the time, was one of the first resources I came across when I started looking for other jobs. And it was so refreshing and so encouraging at the time. I think I probably just found you on Google at the time. And it was so refreshing to see some of those blog articles about how to write your resume, or just thinking about the corporate sector versus your law enforcement world. And me being able to realize, wow, other people have done this, and look at all these resources that are out there. So we may talk about this some more, but I mean, I've watched so many of your episodes, if not all of them, and there are some law enforcement titans that have come on here and spoken with you. So I'm humbled and blessed and just thankful to be able to join you and tell a little bit about my story. So about my story, I'll mention that as far as me going from law enforcement to any other job for that matter, especially to the corporate sector, that was not something that I ever planned to do. And I hope I'm not being unclear. When it came to my law enforcement career for the first probably 15 out of my 16 years on the street, I mean, I was going to be a lifer. I was going to do that 25, 30 years, whatever it is, get that government pension that everybody's chasing. So there was a variety of factors that all came together that made me realize, you know what, I think that there's something else I could be doing. I mean, I'd gotten to do a lot of awesome stuff in my career. I spent about half of my law enforcement experience in undercover narcotics, a couple of drug task forces and vice units and things like that. And that was more fun than words can describe, as anybody who has done that kind of work in this profession knows. Little did I know that that investigations experience would later transfer to the corporate sector. Of course, I wasn't thinking at all about that at the time. I would have laughed if anybody would have said, "Oh, wait till you see what you're going to do with this skill set that you're developing in your law enforcement career." But there were a variety of factors that came together. And, I had finished that drug work. I probably wasn't going to go back into that. Other assignments I was pursuing weren't really working out, and I wasn't sure why. I thought I was a good candidate for different kinds of positions that were coming up. In between my years in the drug units, I worked patrol, like a lot of people do, a lot of night shift. And at the same time, I had gone back education-wise, gotten a master's degree that my law enforcement agencies actually paid for through benefits that we had. But that really wasn't leading me anywhere in the law enforcement career, even though I had my master's degree at that time. And it dawned on me that I think these skills and this experience that I have, this is worth something somewhere else. And I started looking over a fairly short period of time. Found the job that I ended up with. There were certainly a lot of applications and other sorts of positions that I pursued before I found the one I ended up in. But it all happened pretty fast. I'd say we're about a 6-month period. That's not always common, but I'd say without a doubt, it has been the best move that I ever made professionally. And we can talk more about that if you have some more specific questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'd like to know is, when you made that conscious decision to actively look for work outside of law enforcement, walk me through that process. Did you have help? Did you hire someone to give you the insights, or you just wing it?
Well, first I'll say I had the full support of my wife, and that was probably the number one thing, I mean, she always supported me in law enforcement. Law enforcement spouses and family members have a whole other set of challenges that just about anybody listening to this understands. But, she supported me. We had talked about that. We had decided, I think I'm going to start looking. A good friend of ours had an HR background in the corporate world, and so I really had a great consultant, in our close circle that helped me out with some of that resume writing and applying and what to put on there, what not to put. So a lot of the questions that guys and gals have that I've talked to, about how do I get noticed? How do I apply? I did have some of those resources. I was lucky to have that within our circle to help me point out, okay, you don't really need this. I like what you've said here, but how can you transfer this over to this particular company or this particular role? Really, and as well as some of the resources like your blog posts that I ran across, really helped me kind of change that mindset that I had from that government, law enforcement realm over to the corporate sector. I also went out and found people that had done what I was trying to do or that had maybe 10, 20 years experience across public and private sector and just got as much advice and as much counsel as I could because I knew that even if I didn't take the same path they did, they had experience and they had insight that I didn't have, and I wanted to learn as much as I could from other people who had walked that path. So I still try to do that to this day, and try to be one of those people for other folks when I can, who are maybe looking to make the kind of move that I made. And I say that I've said this before, and we spoke about it offline, but I'll never pretend to be a career expert, but I think things have gone pretty well for me. Like I said, the move to the corporate sector was the best career decision I ever made. I'm always willing to share my path and help people along and just talk about what worked for me and bring my recommendations from my own experience.
Well, that's kind of how I got to know you, Scott, because follow you on LinkedIn and you have great posts, very informative, educational on the industry, also on transition. But our pre-interview when we talked, you mentioned about when you left, you were leaving without a pension, and there that carrot that they dangle over you is the pension is a huge one because it's a big decision to leave a pension. Pensions are a thing of the past. So if you have one, you really got to think long and hard if you're going to leave mid-career without a pension. However, you did the math, you did the research, which is one of my recommendations to weigh the pros and the cons, and you ended up making the jump as I did. I left after 12 years and have zero regrets. Talk to me about what did you do to prepare. Also, thank you for including your significant other because like I said, it's a team decision to just uproot your career to something completely different. Everybody has to be on board. So walk me through that.
Yeah. So this is something, and really, this is a lot of insight I've gotten after the fact and thought back about. I wish I could say, oh, I lined all these pieces up and I knew exactly what I was doing. I mean, there was definitely some steps of faith out here when I made the switch in careers. But part of the reason that I didn't mention a few minutes ago that I realized I think now is like, if I'm going to make a move, I got to do it now. At the time was I worked for two different agencies. One was a state agency, one was a municipal agency, and every state is different with their pensions. But in Illinois, those two pension systems don't talk to each other unless there's some kind of legislative action where they combine them, or you can buy in to one from the other. So I was looking at two separate pensions that neither one had a lot of standing on their own anyway, trying to figure out, is there a way I can combine these? Maybe that opportunity would have opened up at some point, but I knew that if I was going to make a move and do something else, once I had decided that was something I wanted to pursue, the clock was ticking because you gotta, I had maybe 15, 20 working years left. And that's funny. I still say I have 15, 20 working years left. Maybe I'm getting younger. I don't know. But in any event, I knew that if I was going to make headway in another career, I had to get started sooner rather than later. So the pension thing, what I've discovered is it's I call it the pension myth or the pension fallacy. It's not that you don't get the pension and that they're not as good as everybody says. If you make it to that 20, 25, 30 years, whatever it is for your state and your agency, and you can walk away and get a check for the rest of your life, great. I'm happy for you. I didn't make it to that point, but you can be totally fine financially without it. And that's something that especially once you're mid-career like I was, it's hard to realize that at the time because you got all this time in. Like, I don't want all that to be wasted. What am I going to do? How am I going to retire? And so I'm not a financial expert, at least not yet, and I won't pretend to be one, but um, it really is a piece that people need to sit down with somebody qualified and say, here's my contributions. I need to understand your agency. When you leave, what happens? For me, I got from one agency, I got all my contributions back plus some interest. From my second agency, I got all my contributions back. No interest, but it was about a 6.5 year period. So, it wasn't a gigantic loss. It wasn't like I lost out on 20 or 30 years worth of interest. All those contributions I rolled right into other private investments with a financial planner. There's no, I didn't lose any of the money. There's no uh, tax ramifications or anything like that. And then I started up, some IRAs and Roths and things like that, the other types of investments through my financial planner. And all that is growing. I've seen the charts. I'm going to be more than fine when I get to retirement age, just with that chunk that I moved over with no penalties, letting it grow, adding to it over the years. In fact, I'm going to be better. And here's how. And this is kind of that pension fallacy that pension will take care of you for the rest of your life. Well, it does. You get those checks for the rest of your life. But most pensions, when you die, they die with you. When you take this money over to private investments into the market and somehow, and there's a lot of safe ways to do that where you're not going to lose it all if some company goes bankrupt or something. You take that money there, it grows, and it's a nest egg that never goes anywhere. The idea is you draw off that for retirement, and when you die, you decide what happens to it. If your family inherits it, you've built a legacy that you can pass on to your family. If you want to donate it, whatever you want to do, you've actually got more in those programs than you do when you walk away with a public sector pension. That's an observation and a realization that I made a little later on, but it really was a game changer.
Oh, I think it's a really important point for those that you at mid-career that decide, I really want to take a shot and leave, whatever you want to do outside of law enforcement. And as you say, the fallacy, I think one of the concerns is, hey, I'm leaving, I'm giving up my guaranteed check if I stay 20, 25, 30 years. But it still doesn't mean you can't take the money and roll it over, right? There's all these laws that you can roll over without any penalties into,
Exactly.
like a 401k if you have one, an IRA. And that's where I'm glad you mentioned having a good financial planner. I have one too. And that's how the rest of the world, the civies or civilians do it, right? There's like
Exactly.
there's a million cops out there. How many US citizens do we have that are working? Like 200 million or 150? I mean, I can't do the math.
And let me mention something real quick just about that. That's we find ourselves in law enforcement or, a lot of public sector jobs, but especially first responders. I found myself, and this is again a realization I've made later, I was in this government bubble. The only thing I saw were my options within this little bubble, my promotional opportunities, maybe the specialty units that I could put in for, what life looked like at retirement. It was my defined pension. That's the only thing I could do. And once I got out of that bubble, I couldn't believe what the rest of the world actually had to offer. My mind never went there when I had it set in there. I'm a law enforcement lifer. I just never realized all the other options that were available. That goes in so many different ways. We're talking about retirement and pension funds, but I mean, you talk about professional opportunities and just all the other things you can do. Man, there's a big world out there that sometimes you can be really bottled up in your agency or even in the profession if you move between agencies, and you just don't see so many of those opportunities.
Yeah, I love it how you use the analogy of being in a bubble. And just going back to the mid-career folks, because the ones that are listening out there, and I don't know how to explain it, but you have this burning desire in your gut that it's time to go. You don't know why, you don't know what's causing it, but you just know it's time to do something different than law enforcement. And we're just here saying it's okay. We're successful. Others have been successful, but if you're unsure, then just stick it out. Keep that pension because that's a great option to have. So Scott, now that you've been in the private sector for 5 years, talk a little about what you're doing because you have somewhat of a technical role outside of your traditional investigative background in policing. Walk me through the 5 years in your corporate career and how did you attain these opportunities for this upward mobility? And you have a pretty cool job right now.
Yeah, so this is not something I would have thought I would have landed in. It wasn't a role that I thought when I came to my company or left law enforcement, oh, this is what I'm gonna do. I had a very natural transition, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the job I'm in now, I'm essentially a technology project manager. Really, it's in the realm of product management and user experience, which are probably terms you're familiar with from the corporate world and the way that big companies interact with one another and run their projects. But the job I got was an absolutely fantastic starting point for the corporate sector. I came into an internal investigations role within the internal audit department of my company. Did I know what internal audit was? I had no clue. Did I know how it interacted with the rest of the company? Nope, I didn't know that. But I knew that I could do this investigations job when I realized what all went into it, and I had a great interview with a couple of the folks who ended up being my managers in the audit department for my first couple roles. I had a great interview. I had brought materials. I was prepared. I brought some investigative examples of my work, some investigative case files, with the important stuff removed. And from the time I had that interview, I met with one of the directors at that time. I knew it was a good fit, and I was offered and did take that role. So I was an internal investigator for the company for a couple years. Within 6 months, I mean, I'm a Midwest police officer, thought I'm never leaving this state. This is the bubble I'm in. This is where I'm going to stay. Within 6 months, I'm flying coast to coast with this company, doing sit down interviews on these high stakes situations, within my company, and saying to myself, how did I get here? But the skill set that I needed and that I had developed interviewing drug dealers, for so many years, you take out the drug dealer part and you put in, the corporate, actions that I was investigating, and there was so much transferable about that first role I landed in from where I had been, which I never would have built that bridge by myself. I think that my first couple of managers, my bosses, saw that, thankfully, and put me on the team, and that's where I ended up. I did that job for a few years, had a great time doing it. Nothing bad happened there with anything in that role, but I knew as I began within the internal audit department, it was a great place for me to start because in audits or investigations, I was constantly engaging with different parts of the company. Every few weeks, every month or two, I had to become an expert in some part of company operations if I was going to investigate and sit down and have a pretty serious you know career altering interview with someone, write up a 20 to 30 page report that I was then going to collaborate with our law department on in many cases whether or not this person should keep their role within the company. And I had to become an expert. I had to like hit the ground running because that was the nature of the audit department. As I saw that, I thought I really would like the opportunity to get some broader experience. And one observation that I've had, people told me this, and it's true. If you want to do something within a large company, especially, and you pursue relationships within that company and you put yourself out there, you'll probably get the opportunities that you're looking for. And so I was put on a business audit squad where I got to work some different kinds of financial audits and regulatory and government type of audits that the company was involved in. That widened my scope even more. From there, I went into almost a grassroots initiatives area of the company that really is the same role I have now, but we changed departments that was related to here's new software we're developing. We don't need software developers, but we need people that can take an outside look at all the parts and pieces that are going on, all the people involved with developing this software for our customers and our employees to use. And, having those tough conversations sometimes, pulling it, looking at this from a third party point of view. And so that's where the project management part came in. And once they decided from this initiatives department I was in that the company decided we want this to be a permanent role, they picked us up and moved us over into a technology area called digital experience, which is where I am now. And I'm just blown away that I landed where I did, but it was all through, wanting to learn more, do more, establishing mentoring and professional relationships, and those opportunities and those doors opened up.
Well, Scott, you described with one of my pre earlier bosses, general manager Charlie. He told me, in the corporate world, you create your own destiny,
Yeah.
and you Scott created your own destiny through those networks, through those relationships, and it's amazing from that government bubble you talked about, where it's pretty fixed, right? It's fixed on how high you can go, where you can go, versus in the corporate world, if you have very positive and significant impacts, build relationships and network, the sky is the limit.
Yeah,
And
I mean, the possibilities are almost endless. I've been a part, I feel like I know a lot about my company and the industry, and the opportunities are still endless. I mean, there's so many things that I could do, that anybody can do if you pursue those things and just keep learning, keep making connections.
Scott, I want to thank you again for being on Cop to Corporate. I want to thank you for giving back to the men and women in blue, as you've done over the years, giving advice, insights, great posts. And we will be following your career, as you have many, many more years to build your career in the private sector. For those of you that have not subscribed yet to my YouTube channel, Cop to Corporate, please do that, and go to cop2corporate.com to learn more about insights and ways to transfer to the private sector. Thank you.